Imagine living in a world where one mistake could start a nuclear war. For almost 50 years, two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, faced each other in silence. As they were, building weapons, spying, and fighting for control without ever firing a direct shot. This was the Cold War, a battle of fear, power, and survival that shaped the modern world. The Cold War was a world built on secrets, a silent battlefield stretched across oceans and continents, fought not with armies, but with whispers, codes, and invisible loyalties. In the heart of Moscow, among the marble corridors of Soviet power, one man carried a secret that could shift the balance of the world. His name was Oleg Vladimirovich Penkovsky, a decorated colonel in the GRU, the Soviet Military Intelligence Service. On the surface, he was loyal, disciplined, and proud. To his superiors, he was a rising star in the empire of spies. But beneath the uniform and medals, Penkovsky was a man at war with his conscience. He had seen the paranoia that ruled his country. He had watched officers vanish overnight, accused of imaginary crimes. He had witnessed blind loyalty destroy lives, and he began to wonder, what if serving truth meant betraying his nation? In 1960, while the world focused on missiles and nuclear threats, Penkovsky made a decision that would change history. He reached out, quietly, carefully, to the West. Through a British businessman named Greville Wynne, he offered something extraordinary, the deepest secrets of the Soviet military. The West had spies everywhere, but never one like Penkovsky, a man from the very core of the Red Machine. What began as a single message would soon evolve into one of the most dangerous intelligence operations of the Cold War. A double life began, a life where every handshake could mean death. As Penkovsky passed secrets hidden in matchboxes and film canisters, his courage grew, and so did the KGB's suspicion. In the silence of his apartment, Oleg knew that every knock on the door could be his last. But still, he continued, for truth, for peace, for the world. In London and Washington, Penkovsky's information caused disbelief. Could it be real? Could a colonel inside the Soviet intelligence willingly betray his country? His first transmissions contained military documents so precise, so detailed, that Western analysts thought it was a trap. But soon the truth became undeniable. The information was genuine, and it was gold. Penkovsky revealed the structure of the Soviet missile forces, secret launch sites, nuclear strategies, and names of key commanders. He gave the West something priceless, insight into how the Soviet mind planned war. For the first time, the CIA and MI6 could see through the Iron Curtain. At first, his handlers thought he was motivated by money, but Oleg refused payments. He didn't ask for escape nor luxury. He wanted something deeper, understanding. He wanted peace between two worlds that stood ready to destroy each other. In quiet rooms in London, analysts realized they were reading the most important intelligence of the century. They called him Agent Hero. Others simply called him the man who saved the world. As his reports crossed desks in Washington, they reached one man who would soon face the greatest test of his presidency, John F. Kennedy. Penkovsky's intelligence would later help guide Kennedy through the Cuban Missile Crisis, allowing him to read Soviet intentions with clarity no leader had ever possessed. But even as the West celebrated its invisible savior, Penkovsky's life in Moscow grew darker. He was being followed. The KGB was watching. His colleagues whispered. His wife noticed the fear in his eyes. In the chessboard of the Cold War, Penkovsky had made his move. Now the other side was preparing to strike back. Every day in Moscow felt heavier for Oleg Penkovsky. He smiled at work, attended meetings, and saluted superiors. But inside, fear was growing. He knew the KGB was watching everyone, always searching for a traitor. Each time he left home, he looked over his shoulder. He checked mirrors, listened for footsteps, and changed routes. A small mistake could mean his death. Yet he continued to pass information to the West through his contact, Greville Wynne. The two met in quiet restaurants or during Wynne's business trips. Penkovsky would hand over rolls of film, hidden in gift boxes or magazines. Inside those films were thousands of secret pages, maps, codes, and reports from Soviet military command. The British and American agents admired his bravery. They knew that if he was caught, no one could save him. But Penkovsky didn't stop. He believed his work could prevent a nuclear war. He wanted both nations to understand each other's strength, so neither side would start a fight that could destroy the world. As his confidence grew, so did the danger. The KGB had started to notice strange movements. They began to trace people who met foreigners too often. They checked letters and phone calls. In secret rooms, agents whispered Penkovsky's name. One night, while walking home, Penkovsky felt he was being followed. A car stopped behind him, its lights dim. He walked faster, his heart pounding. Then the car drove away. It was a warning. They knew something. Still, he didn't stop. For Oleg Penkovsky, there was no turning back. He had chosen his path, even if it would cost him his life. By 1962, the KGB had placed more eyes on Penkovsky. His mail was opened, his office was searched, and his phone sometimes clicked when he picked it up. He knew what that meant. They were listening. At home, he tried to act normal. He played with his daughter, talked with his wife, and smiled for the neighbors. But inside, he felt trapped. Every sound in the hallway made him freeze. Every knock on the door felt like the end. Meanwhile, his secret work was changing history. The documents he passed to the West gave American intelligence the truth about Soviet missiles, how many they had, where they were placed, and what they could do. This information helped President Kennedy face the Cuban Missile Crisis with calm and confidence. But in Moscow, Oleg was running out of luck. The KGB had captured a small group of people working with the British Embassy. One of them gave information that led to Oleg's name. The walls were closing in. Greville Wynne, his British contact, noticed Oleg's messages had become shorter and full of fear. Then suddenly there was silence. No more letters, no more meetings. Wynne knew something terrible had happened. One cold evening, Oleg saw black cars parked near his home. He didn't run. He simply looked at his family one last time and waited. When the knock finally came, he opened the door. The men in coats didn't speak. They just took him away. Oleg Penkovsky, the man who had fooled the KGB for years, was now their prisoner. The black car drove Oleg Penkovsky through the dark streets of Moscow. He said nothing. He already knew where he was going. The Lubyanka prison, the heart of the KGB. Inside, time lost meaning. Days and nights blended together under bright lights and locked doors. The questions never stopped. Who helped you? How long have you been a traitor? What did you give the British? Oleg tried to stay calm. At first, he denied everything. Then, when faced with evidence, he told them the truth. But not all of it. He wanted to protect the people who had worked with him. The KGB wanted more than confessions. They wanted to break his spirit. They kept him awake for long hours. They made him write reports again and again. They brought in his friends and showed him their faces, some beaten, some silent. Still, Oleg refused to betray his allies. He admitted he passed information, but said it was for peace, not money. I wanted to stop war, he told them. I wanted both sides to understand the cost of fear. In the outside world, news spread slowly. Western intelligence realized their best source inside the Soviet Union was gone. In London, Greville Wynne was also arrested during a trip to Moscow. He was thrown into the same nightmare, accused of being Oleg's partner in crime. Weeks passed. Penkovsky's body weakened, but his will stayed strong. The interrogators grew angry. They could not understand how one man had fooled the KGB for so long. Deep inside, Oleg knew what awaited him, but he also knew his mission was not in vain. His secrets had already saved millions of lives, and no prison could take that away. In 1963, the Soviet Union held a public trial. Cameras flashed. Officials filled the courtroom. The government wanted to make an example, to show the world what happened to traitors. Oleg Penkovsky stood before the judges in a plain gray suit. His face was pale, his eyes tired, but his voice was calm. He admitted sharing information, but he spoke with courage. "I did it for peace," he said, "not for hatred, not for gain." The KGB officers stared at him coldly. To them, he was the enemy, a man who had betrayed his homeland during its most secret years. The audience whispered as they read the charges: espionage, treason, conspiracy with foreign powers. Greville Wynne, his British contact, sat in another courtroom, facing his own trial. Unlike Oleg, Wynne would later be exchanged for a captured Soviet spy and return home. But Oleg would not be saved. The verdict was clear from the start. The judges declared him guilty on all counts. The sentence was death. For the Soviet Union, it was justice. For the West, it was tragedy. For history, it was the end of one of the greatest intelligence stories ever told. As guards led him away, Oleg looked neither left nor right. He had already accepted his fate. He had risked everything for what he believed in: peace through truth. Outside the courtroom, the KGB erased his name from records, trying to make him disappear. But they could not erase what he had done. The information he provided had helped stop the Cuban Missile Crisis and guided the world away from nuclear war. Oleg Penkovsky, the man who fooled the KGB, was gone. But his story was just beginning to echo across history. After the trial, Oleg Penkovsky was taken back to his prison cell. The noise of the court was gone. Now there was only silence. The sound of footsteps in the hallway, the creak of the door, the ticking of time running out. He knew what would happen next. The sentence was death, and in the Soviet Union, there were no second chances. Still, he stayed calm. He wrote letters to his family, though most of them were never delivered. He asked for forgiveness and prayed that one day his daughter would understand why he had done what he did. The guards treated him harshly, but some respected his courage. Even they knew he had changed history. One night he asked a guard, "Do you have children?" The guard nodded. "Then pray they never live in a world without truth," Oleg said quietly. Outside his cell, the world moved on. In the West, newspapers whispered his name. Intelligence officers spoke of him as the man who saw both sides. His information had given President Kennedy confidence during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the same information that helped prevent nuclear war. The KGB kept his execution secret. No photos, no final words, no grave. To them, he was an enemy who should vanish without a trace. But stories spread. Some said he was shot. Others claimed he was burned alive in silence. No one really knew. All that remained certain was this: Oleg Penkovsky's mission ended not in glory, but in sacrifice. Yet the peace he hoped for, even if brief, had been real. Years passed, but the name Oleg Penkovsky refused to disappear. In secret rooms in London and Washington, his story was told again and again. The Soviet colonel who gave the West the truth they desperately needed. Historians called him one of the most important spies of the 20th century. CIA officers said his information helped them understand the Soviet threat more clearly than ever before. And while the world never saw his face again, his work lived on in the peace that followed. Greville Wynne, the man who carried Oleg's secrets, was released in a spy exchange in 1964. He returned to Britain, weak and shaken, but alive. Wynne spent the rest of his life telling people about Oleg, the friend who had risked everything. He said, he was no traitor. He was a man who wanted the world to survive. In Russia, Penkovsky's name was erased from history books for many years. Only after the fall of the Soviet Union did the truth slowly return. Some called him brave. Others still called him a traitor. But beyond politics, his story became something more. A reminder of courage, sacrifice, and the power of one man's choice. Oleg Penkovsky lived a short life, but his actions helped stop a war that could have destroyed millions. He proved that even in the darkest times, one person can stand up for peace, even if it costs everything. And so, in the quiet corners of history, his name still whispers. The spy who fooled the KGB. The man who tried to save the world. By the late 1980s, the world was changing fast. The Soviet Union was weak both economically and politically. Its leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, had introduced reforms called glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. These reforms gave people more freedom, but they also made many citizens question the old system. In Eastern Europe, countries under Soviet control started demanding independence. Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia began peaceful revolutions. The pressure reached East Germany, where the Berlin Wall had divided families and friends for almost 3 decades. In 1989, protests grew stronger in East Germany. Thousands of people demanded the right to travel freely. The government tried to calm the situation, but lost control. On November 9, 1989, an East German official accidentally announced that people could cross the border immediately. Crowds rushed to the checkpoints. Border guards, unsure of what to do, opened the gates. People climbed the wall, cheered, and celebrated as they crossed from East to West Berlin. Families reunited, tears and joy filled the air, and the world watched in disbelief. The fall of the Berlin Wall became the most powerful symbol of the Cold War's end. It showed that human hope and freedom could defeat fear and control. Within a year, Germany reunited as one country. The wall that once divided the world was gone, and so was the Iron Curtain. The fall of the wall didn't just change Germany, it changed the world. It marked the beginning of a new era, one where the Cold War's tension started to fade. The Cold War didn't end with a single event, but through a series of moments that changed global politics forever. After the Berlin Wall fell, one Eastern European nation after another broke free from Soviet influence. Inside the Soviet Union, people wanted democracy and better lives. Economic struggles made it impossible for the USSR to continue its massive military spending. Gorbachev tried to save the system with reforms, but it was too late. In 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. 15 new independent countries were formed, including Russia, Ukraine, and the Baltic states. The world watched as the red Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. For the first time in almost half a century, the fear of nuclear war faded. The United States emerged as the only global superpower. Many hoped this meant peace and cooperation would finally rule the world. However, the end of the Cold War did not mean the end of conflict. New challenges appeared: regional wars, terrorism, and political rivalries. But the long shadow that had divided East and West was finally gone. The Cold War left behind lessons that the world still remembers. That fear can destroy nations, that freedom cannot be silenced forever, and that power, when unchecked, can crumble from within. It was not just a war without battles. It was a struggle of beliefs, ideas, and hope. And in the end, it was the human desire for freedom that won.